Hello, it's Mr. Carl King. Welcome to the Carl King Podcast. This episode departs from the 3-episode tradition I've had going. It's a free-form chat with my friend and fusion guitarist Nils Rurack. For those who have listened to my Grand Architects of the Universe album, you've heard Nils doing the voices of several characters, which are some of my favorite moments on the album. And that's him looking like a Borg in the top left corner of the album cover. Anyway, after dinner one night, we plugged in some mics and hit record, and I started asking him questions. Please enjoy this candid and unprepared situation. I'm here with Nils Rurack. Just one.
Hello.
Just one Rur.
Just Rur, yes.
Rur.
Yes,
Nils
Rur.
Rur. In my home studio here. He comes over often for dinner, and tonight we decided to talk.
Yeah, but you never cook for me.
Nils, I would like to visit Germany. First of all, let's say I want to visit Germany. You are from Germany, right?
That is correct.
You were born where in Germany?
I was born in Hamburg, Germany.
Do you know why I want to go to Germany?
I do not.
I don't either.
It is a beautiful country.
It is?
Yes. We have everything. We have tall mountains. We have hills. We have flatlands. We even have coastal regions and beaches.
Now, if you were to take me on a trip to Germany and we were bros and just decided to go on a trip to Germany at some point, just fly over there, what sorts of things would you show me?
I would probably start taking you to Hamburg because it's the place I'm most familiar with. And I know it's interesting when we talk about this. I'm from Germany, but I left Germany about, 25 years ago by now. So really, even though I spent more than 20 years in Hamburg, that is the place where I'm most familiar with. And this is why I would take you there, because I know the places to go. And can, depending on what you're really into, we can make it a fun trip.
Yeah, but what the hell is Hamburg? What does that mean?
Hamburg is a city of 1.5 million people living there, roughly. And it is actually one of the greener cities with large waterways. But it's also a modern industrial city. The second largest harbor in Europe, and it's not even located directly on an ocean or something like that. It's just on a river.
How is it different from Berlin?
Berlin does sit on a river, but Berlin is a lot more landlocked and sprawling. Berlin's more than twice the size of Hamburg. Let's just say there's a whole lot more asphalt, buildings, and people.
Do you consider yourself a hamburger? I'm sorry. I can't. It's terrible.
Well,
I'm
definitely not a Braunschweiger, so thanks very much.
I don't know what that is, but that's great.
Well, that's a type of sausage. Now, yes, I am a hamburger. Yes, most definitely. Am I a beef patty? No.
I am a typical American white male, heterosexual, as far as I know, and I've never been to Germany or never really been overseas. So what kinds of things do you think might surprise me in Germany or Hamburg? Are there... Oh, it sounds like you want to say something. I'll let you go.
Here's the interesting thing. Like I already mentioned the harbor. Large parts of the United States are not on the coast. So we do have a large East Coast and a large West Coast. Many people from within the country don't know about harbors and or are not that familiar with it. And so
I just want to say, for everyone listening to this, we're just making shit up. There was really no plan for this podcast episode. I just thought I would talk to Nils about going to Germany. But I think it's funny that we're now talking about harbors.
Yes, but it's an important part of Hamburg. That's why. And I wasn't insinuating that people don't know what a harbor is, but I mean, having seen one and having traveled through a harbor on just a little boat, taken a tour basically, driving by the biggest ocean liners or ships, the freight ships that transport like the 15-story high containers and stuff. It's pretty impressive. So that's something that, yeah, if you live somewhere near New York or so, you might have seen it in the harbors there somewhere. But if you're from any other part especially the continental United States, you're not very much aware of that. And it's just something impressive to see. What else would I take you to? Hamburg has a lot of churches. A lot of German or even European cities have old churches. Churches that are so old, some of them predate, I would say, whenever America was discovered even. So
medieval.
Yes. Well, the ones in Hamburg are not quite that old, but there's a couple of very interesting ones. So you're in a church that has been hundreds of years old, and you can actually get up in the clock tower and everything, and it's huge. You can overlook the city and everything, harbor and city, and it's yes, you can go. If you're in Chicago, you can go up on the Hancock Tower and do the same thing. If you're in New York, you can get in your Lady Liberty, but I don't know if you've ever done that in a church. Another thing is there's a church that is, you can only see about half of the tower, the wall, standing, because during World War II, the rest of the church was completely blown up, destroyed, bombed. The interesting thing about that is, so that might surprise you, they preserve the ruins that are left standing to basically remind people of, hey, if you're going to war, this is the shit that can happen. That, yeah, maybe others fight back, and then they will bomb you, and then there will be destruction.
So here's a comparison between the United States and Germany. There was a massive amount of destruction in the world wars in Germany, correct?
Yes.
And these things generally have not happened here. There's been a few attacks, but they've been very small. And so Americans, in a way, are quite removed and sheltered from the idea of attacks. Yes?
Yes.
In a way, they're sort of, wars are kind of a virtual thing that doesn't directly, unless they're a soldier or something like that. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, is that a lot of Americans have parents, or probably more the grandparents, that have fought in Korean War, Vietnam War, maybe even somebody alive that fought in the Second World War. That is one experience, and as I think, any type of military actions is probably traumatizing.
But over there, it would traumatize everyone. There was no way to get away from...
It would be the other way around. It would be, so you imagine you're sitting in your house and you hear the sirens go off, that there's an air raid coming. You have no idea what that means. Now, I don't either, thankfully, but my parents, and especially my grandparents, when they were still alive, they would tell you stories about how that was and what happened. And I think that's hard for people to understand if you haven't lived through it. Because who can explain that to you? There's a plane up there. Well, yeah, we see planes every day, right? Commercial planes. Sometimes we go to air shows and watch military planes. But if there's a squadron of planes coming and they drop bombs, you run for the bunkers, and you just can't imagine what's happening there.
I'd like to ask you about the education system. You have some kids, and you have experience with the educational system in Germany. And I wonder, this is not quite necessarily a fair comparison because it's, 30 years later or whatever. What do you think of this situation here with the education system?
I have some kids, that's right.
Yes.
Maybe some more, or some fewer, but some kids, yes. I've lived in several countries, and I just say that to give a quick explanation of for the longer haul here. One thing you do is, as you live in one country or in another, is you start comparing things. So when I moved to the Netherlands, I started comparing life in the Netherlands to life in Germany. When I then moved to the United States, I started comparing United States to both other countries. I think it's natural because it's your surroundings and they change, and you try to make sense of it all, right? One thing when I was young, when I was still in school in Germany, one thing that we learned about stuff going on, and this is 30 years ago, is that there would be exams in American schools which are like multiple choice questions or those kind of things. And even at high school level for certain areas. And this is something, at least back in the day, completely unthinkable for Germans. We would have exams where we would ask questions and we would have to formulate an answer by ourselves. So if we didn't know that that thing in front of a camera is a lens, we didn't have 4 answers and eliminate which one's the wrong ones, because it's not called computer, it's not called keyboard, and it's not called microphone. So it must be lens. We would have to come up with an answer like, that thing is called a lens, and this is how it functions, or whatever the question requires. And again, this is what we understood, what we learned about things going on. And I'm not saying, oh, well, Americans only do multiple choice questions. No, I'm sure they don't. The fact that they use any of those, it's one of the things where we're, as we have progressed to where we are now.
What do you mean we? Where we as in who?
We as in the people. We as the people here in America. If you talk
United
about
States,
my children, for example,
yeah,
we have all this standardized testing and standardized learning. So it might not be multiple choice, but it's not going away either. So we're testing kids for or training kids to answer questions correctly. We're not training and teaching them to learn to think about the questions, to think for themselves. I noticed that a lot with the tests that that we prepare for our kids, that we sit with them, and there are very few things like, hey, describe this, which could be just the perfect question of, I want to stimulate your critical thinking and make you work, basically, instead of just repeating, well, A is A and B is B and 2 + 2 is 4, and the right answer is in there somewhere.
So you're saying that when you were growing up in Germany, you didn't have multiple choice?
We actually did not have multiple choice
At
questions at all in school. At all.
Wow.
And I'm going to give you another thing that I don't. I can't speak to it too much because I'm not here in school, but I do not think that you have a like a participation evaluation. So what that means is that your grade would be made up only for 50% by how you do on exams. The other 50% would come from how you participate in class. So if you're simply talking with your neighbor, not saying anything, never raise your hand to contribute anything, you will basically fail that class, and you can have the best grades in your exam, and you would end up being average. If you're having a hard time with exams and you're struggling sometimes to get the right answers, so you're not making really good grades on your exams, but you're very enthusiastic and learning in class and participating, you can improve your grades greatly.
Fail most of your tests and still pass the class, barely, if you participated and you were...
Yes, barely. So it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't take away if you fail your exams like miserably. Yeah. It's going to be really hard for you to drag yourself through there. But you can. I mean, there's always chance of improving your grades by good participation, and good participation includes that you're listening, that you're paying attention, that you're thinking about what's being talked about in class, and that you contribute.
I recall many classes in Venice, Florida, probably middle school and high school, where we were graded. A percentage of our grade was we would have to turn in our notebook at the end of the year, and the teacher would evaluate how good our notebook looked.
Is that like the artwork that you made on it when you were bored, or?
No, you just turn in your notebook like a 3-ring binder, and then all of your notes that you took. How did your notes look? And was it clean and organized? And it was like worth 25% of your grade or something if you had a nice notebook, which seems kind of crazy to me. And of course, I always failed on that every time. But I got straight Fs through most of high school. So
they didn't appreciate your doodles, did they?
No, I usually didn't even have a notebook. So
I know you mentioned that to me before. That thing about your experience in high school in Venice, Florida, and you had mentioned to me that there's people basically coming into class that are trying to get you interested for taking jobs. Like,
yes, people from factories would come in. Managers from factories would come in and give a lecture on why it's important to be on time, and they would advertise their factory and prepare you for a job at the factory.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever experienced anything like that in Germany. And I mean, I don't want to speculate, but in a certain way, I have the idea that we could try and teach the children here a lot more of critical thinking. Because I think why would you want to train kids to go work in a factory?
Well, in a way, the education is to keep you out of a factory.
That's what you would think.
Yeah.
Now, let's go return to the German idea. So I went to the gymnasium, which is like a high school plus 1 year. It's just because they think German slackers have to go to school longer.
Wait, what did you say? You went to a gymnasium?
Yes, that's what we call it.
What does that mean?
That is the high school, the highest form of basically high school. And it's not just the sports building in school. It's the highest version of the education prior to college. And
the highest version of high school?
Yes.
There's multiple versions of high school?
There are 3 different versions.
Three different versions of high school?
Yes. So the gymnasium is a way, and elementary school is usually shorter. You got 4 years. Okay. And then we have 2 years, what you would call middle school. But at the end of your 4-year elementary school, you're going to pick which one of the 3 grades or versions of high school you're going to take.
So wait. When you say elementary school, is there a kindergarten?
There's a...
What age do you start elementary school? Age 2 or something?
No. Generally age 6, same as
age
here.
Age 6?
Yeah, but that would be first grade. So you can go to what we call preschool, because kindergarten is that German word, is what we use for the toddlers and such until they're school age.
Okay.
So here it's the other way around.
Okay, so first grade through 4th grade is elementary.
Yes.
And then in 5th grade, you decide what...
At the end of 4th grade, you actually decide which path you're going to take for the next 5, 6, or... That's 9 years.
That's at like 9 years old, or so.
It's at 10 years old.
Okay.
So and this is where I was going to get at. Grade 5 and 6 is kind of like middle school, is where you can still change between paths that were chosen, and those paths are chosen between what teachers recommend, what parents think it's best, and it's really, it sounds harsh, but I've noticed it's really pretty supportive of the child. Let's put it that way. There are children that are
not. What do you mean by
harsh?
What's harsh?
Well, you get 3 different grades of school. So you say you get the lowest grade. What's the kid gonna say? Why are you picking on me? Why do you send me to that school for dummies when I could go to the
oh, I see.
To the smarter school? But
that's in high school, right? We're talking...
Yes.
Okay, so high school, you have 3 different levels of...
Yes.
Like 3 different... Yeah, okay, got it.
The interesting part
3
there
different
is...
qualities of high school,
Yes,
sort of.
yes.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of... at the end of elementary school, there's a lot of thought goes into what are your grades and your academic abilities. This is where the school goes to the parents and says, your kid is going to do well in this level of school. There might be discussion. There might be... They might not agree, which is why during grade 5 and 6 there's a lot of possibility of changing. Reality is when parents go like, no, we want our kid to go to gymnasium because that's the highest level, no matter what grades they bring home, change will often happen downwards, that kids get basically downgraded to go to a lower level of school. Going up after you've been classified in a lower level is usually pretty hard to achieve. And that
Why?
It probably is an age where there are a few kids really trying to overachieve wherever they are. They'll just go with what they do. On the other hand, if you're really not academically inclined, you're going to fail in gymnasium real fast.
Okay, so what are these other 2 versions of high school?
I'm glad you asked. One thing we do in Germany, and we really don't do that a lot here in the U.S., probably in certain areas, but apprenticeships are really, really big in Germany. So if you want to learn a trade, instead of going to college or anywhere else...
Could you name a few trades? What are you thinking of when you say that? What do you think of a trade?
You could be a furniture maker, you could be an electrician, you could be any kind like that. They're good jobs. And what you get is you get a 2-year education on the job, paid, not a full salary, but paid. You don't go to college, you don't go to university. You get out of high school, you'll learn a trade.
Now, this is 2 years after high school.
That is after high school.
Okay.
So your lower grade high schools feed more or less directly into these jobs. So you're going to school shorter than somebody at the highest level. You're going respective 9 or 10 years total of your life to school. So you're younger when you get out, but then you do a 2-year apprenticeship. And after you've learned a trade and you did a good job, well, you will find a good job. That model functions very well as far as I can tell.
Okay, but you're talking now, this is the lower level, quality. In a way.
It's both
less academic.
It's both lower levels, both less academic ones. Yes.
So both of them feed into trades.
Yes. Well, the middle one can do both. You get trades, which is on-the-job training for a skill. The middle one will do the same thing, but you also have a short version of college. So what that means is if you're done with the gymnasium, you go to college, you go to university, as it's called in Germany anyway. It can last anywhere from 5 to 10 years or so, whatever. This is what Germans make fun of. The slacker students that just keep studying, and if they're done with one discipline, then they'll start the next one because they're never going to work. They're just always studying. But so, I mean, overall average university time is about 5 years or so. There is a 2-year short version college education. It's not as extensive as university. It's not on-the-job training. It's somewhere in between. You can pick that too once you're in the middle tier. So you have your own opportunities. You can go trade. You can add, if you do, for example, that 2-year college, if you do evening classes as well to get your gymnasium diploma, you can do that, and then continue on university higher education if you want. You have lots of choices. And at that point, it depends on how hard you work, basically.
Question. How standardized is this system throughout the country? Is this... do you find that in one area they go by this, in another area they go by something else?
It is very standardized. I'm actually just thinking, I'm not even doing it justice. There is a 4th version of high school. just to confuse
Is
people.
it secret?
No, it's not.
The way you're describing it, and I don't know if it's just because of the way you're describing the system, but during my high school experience, there was no path to having a future. I got done with high school and basically went and got a job as a dishwasher because I was like, what the fuck do I do next? And I didn't fit in anywhere because I had failed through most of high school, barely got out. And it makes me maybe envious the way you're describing it, that there was actually a system for people to fit into that actually would guide them along and from a young age, helping them figure out where they're going in life.
You could go to the factory.
Yeah.
Or you could go in the military. That's another interesting thing, though. In Germany, we have a draft. And it's funny because we touched on World War II earlier. Germany tried to stay out of any type of conflict since World War II because everybody remembers, we were the bad guys. We really did this horrible thing, and we're not ever waging war on anybody ever again. Yet at the same time, we're having a draft for a military.
So did you do that?
I did not. There was a way out. Let's call it a way out.
Playing La Bamba was your way out?
No. Nothing to do with La Bamba. We might get to that later. But you can deny doing your military service, but you have to do the community service instead.
Did you do that?
I did that.
Oh, all right. So you didn't just completely slack off?
No, not completely. And it's interesting that because they really make it, they have very strict rules that you're not just having a choice that you can say, hey, I don't want to do military service, so I'm going to do community service. No. You have to go through a whole process of writing out your concerns about why you can't do military service, and they're grading you on that. So basically, stuff that we learn in school, we can actually apply here. You can write an essay on why I deny to participate in the military service. On the other hand, again, this is where things are always kind of two-sided or paradox, don't make sense. On the other hand, your military service is shorter than your community service. If we allow you to do community service, then we will punish you for adding on 3 more months than what you usually would have to do before you can actually enter into college or anything like that.
What did you end up doing in community service? Cleaning up cigarettes off the side of the highway or what?
You're not doing that type of community service. What you do is, for example, there are certain organizations that you can do your community service at. For example, something like Meals on Wheels. You can work in old people's homes. You can go cleaning for old people.
And so there's no pay for this, right? Or is there some
There is some compensation for that, but don't compare it to a salary. So it's really not something you can live off of.
So then how do you get by doing it? Do you have to do that full time? Or just part time or what?
No, you do it full time. It's like a base salary, basically. Now, granted, you're coming out of high school. And by the way, this only applies to the males, not to the females, right? Oh. You're coming out of high school. You're probably still living with your parents. So your cost of living is controllable. Mm-hmm. Let's say if your parents would charge you rent for the room because you're no longer in school, you would be able to afford that. It's not entirely, you're not getting paid, but you're not making any riches either. When the military drafts you, you have to go through medical examination, and you will be classified as one of 5 different levels. Like T1 is like your top fit. T2 is like your average good guy. T3 means you have some diseases and you might not function very well. T4 is we really got to work hard to push you into the military. And T5 means, dude, you're out. You don't have to do anything because you're basically a cripple.
And so, do they make you do community service if you're a T5?
No.
Oh.
And so I was a T3, and here's the funny thing about that. Most people are T1, T2, right?
Yeah.
It's, they're especially when they're young people at like 18, 19 years old. That's perfectly fine. I guess they didn't think I was able. And what that translates to in the service is like T3. Of course, you can still go into the military service. You would have to, if people wear a 50-pound backpack, you wear a 25-pound backpack, because if you look at me, if you see my hunchback, you go like, yeah, there's a reason why they didn't want me doing that kind of stuff, because they know it's not going to get better if they put the 50-pound backpack on my back. So that's what the grades are for, like your higher and lower ones. In the community service, they don't really have these things. It's like, hey, if you can drive a car, you already have your driver's license, which we get later than the Americans. But most people in that age are 18 or older. And if you have your driver's license at 18, you can drive a car. You sit all day, but then you carry groceries. So it's like, okay, so you're T3, you shouldn't be carrying groceries. You can drive the car, but you can't be carrying groceries. But overall, most of those community service jobs, those kind of jobs, will have some small physical impact or so. And there are some administrative jobs, because who's going to organize all these guys that are driving around with the Meals on Wheels? Who's going to organize which of you guys is going to clean at the 96-year-old lady in the apartment building 5th floor on Monday? And who's going to in some cases, help the nurse change the diaper on Wednesday?
Oh, I never knew you were a hunchback, so that's interesting detail. What is it like to grow up in Germany and know that Nazi Germany happened right there, not long ago?
I can't tell you what's that like today. But growing up in the 70s and 80s, I can tell you that you can't escape it. And the other reason why you can't...
What do you mean by you can't escape it?
Us Germans are good of reminding each other about what happened. So not just the grandparents that lived through it, and maybe the parents that lived through it. Also in school, there are quite a few organizations that will not let you forget what happened. And the other thing back in the 70s and 80s was that Germany was two countries, and it was divided by a wall. And the other part of the country, now people were actually trying to get out. The country's leadership, the government, did not want to let them get out. And what they did is, if they caught them running away, trying to climb that wall or something, they would shoot them. And you got to imagine, those could be your family, because we had family in the East. My mom was born in the East. A lot of her family was there. Her dad took her and escaped because he would not want his daughter grow up in a socialist or communist country. I have a couple of cousins that currently live in the United States that came from, also from the East. Their parents escaped and went to Bavaria, and they grew up there, and then they ended up marrying American soldiers. So for us, we had that reminder, like, this wall is only here, this country is only divided because of World War II. So no matter what all happened under Nazi Germany and how horrible it was, and even though it was over in 1945, we're 30 years later, and we're reminded of it every day, because a big fat wall in the middle of our capital, and there's people getting shot if they basically want to get out on one side. You couldn't escape that. And that's what I mean. You couldn't escape. It was always in your face.
Was there a lot of education tailored towards defense against authoritarianism and this sort of thing?
Yes. In my own personal experience, we spent at least a year in history class on the Weimar Republic and World War II. It doesn't include World War I and everything preceding that. I mean, we spend a year on how did this happen that the Weimar Republic led to the Third Reich and then World War II. That is your entire year.
With all of that known, what is it like to watch Donald Trump coming to power?
It's definitely scary because I know that there's a lot of people that say, well, you can't compare everybody to Hitler, and I don't think we should. What I do think we need to do is we need to look at the different components and actions from people. We need to listen to what they say. We see a lot of parallels, and you don't just have to use Hitler. You can use Mussolini, or you can even use some of our modern day dictators. Just barely preceding Donald Trump by about a year is the Turkish Chancellor or President Erdogan, who was democratically elected. Everybody thought, okay, that's fine. Turkey is trying to join the European Union, and they're gonna be working on all those things that prevented them from joining earlier because they have some slack to pick up on the treatment of people, their own people, and especially the Kurds. But pretty much against every expectation, Mr. Erdogan decided that he would stage a coup. He would get some young guys in the military to basically occupy a bridge in the middle of Istanbul. As a result of that, he would go through and say, there's a lot of bad people here, and they're doing bad things, and so I need to get rid of them. As you have seen, the military was trying to overthrow me, and I now need to remove judges, university professors, and all kinds of different people that I may or may not have authority over. And he did. He was democratically elected. He had the majority of the votes. But he then decided he wanted to rule without any opposition. And that's one of those things. You don't want to stage your own military coup.
Now, but okay, when you say this, the way you put it in those terms is he wants to rule without any opposition.
Yes.
I would say that is 100% what Donald Trump wants.
Right.
I don't see any indication that he doesn't want that. He entirely wants to be an authoritarian. But go ahead.
I apologize for trying to explain why I throw Erdogan in there with Mussolini and Hitler.
Yeah.
But just giving an example, if you haven't read about Turkey lately, there's a guy who does the same stuff that Kim Jong-un does in North Korea or something.
But the way you put it, it makes it sound almost innocent, is that a person who wants to rule without opposition.
If we're thinking about bad people, we want to compare them to Hitler.
Yeah.
What I was trying to say is there were many dictators and populists and demagogues in the world. We don't necessarily have to compare someone to Hitler. We can compare him to Erdogan. We can compare him to Mussolini or Kim Jong-un.
Yeah.
Again, the other thing that I want to talk about is what did these people do? So what did Hitler do that basically elevated his power? He would tell the people what they want to hear. If you consider the situation where we are after Black Monday in Germany, and it's interesting that we're talking the year 1929. An economic crash in the United States is basically gonna pretty much wipe the German country off the face of the earth, throwing them into the largest depression they had ever known, and they have nothing to do with the American stock market. And this was almost 90 years ago. And yet we already had such a global economy that would affect Germany so much that it basically put the nail in the coffin of a struggling young democratic republic. And people lost their jobs by the millions. And inflation went to places you haven't even thought about. I mean, have you ever seen a banknote that was saying $1 million and it was worth buying a loaf of bread? I mean, that's stuff that we could normally go like, It's crazy. It's Lulu in the head. So people were angry, and people were looking for solutions. So on the one side, you have Russia that for 12 years now had a communist country under Lenin's leadership with a socialist economic vision. Again, 12 years. That's nothing. You can't even say at the time, and we don't have internet or anything like that, or we don't even have television and barely even radio. What do you know about how it really works? Nothing. So there's a big fraction of the Germans that go, we're at the end of our wits. We don't have jobs. We don't have anything.
Why is no one buying Brondo?
I don't think we have Brondo. But so there's a bunch of people that go, the communists have the solution, because we really don't know everything about what's happening there in Russia, but everything's better than what we have. And then you have the Nazis that basically built on the like I said, the whole democratic republic system was struggling since World War One, and a big part of that was that World War One was one of the first wars where the winning parties said the loser needs to pay us for reparations. Basically, the amounts of money that were asked from the German government and the German people by the Allied forces were outrageous. They couldn't afford their own livelihoods, pretty much. So now we have a new government, form of government. We have poverty anyway, and people were trying to make it work. At the same time, we're paying these foreign countries because apparently we were the bad guys that destroyed everything. World War One is a lot more dubious than the clear sign of who did what. But now we get a stock market crash in a foreign country that basically puts all of us out of a job, makes our money worthless, and now we have nothing. And we're still paying reparations to that same country whose stock market crash cost us our jobs. You're angry. You're looking for solutions. So you have the Nazis that said, well, we got to do away with these things. It's kind of like we gotta send the immigrants back. We gotta build a wall. We gotta do stuff. We gotta stop these reparation payments. I will stop these reparation payments. And yes, people, and I will give you jobs. You talk to a group of 1,000 people at a rally, and nobody has jobs, and you'll tell them, I'm going to give you jobs. You're going to vote for the guy. Now, granted, Hitler didn't win with the majority. He won with because there were many parties, many more parties than somebody for two-party system to understand. Hitler got 33% of the vote. That was the majority of the votes. The Communist Party got like 30% of the votes. For the longest time, the centrist parties would actually have a majority if they would all join together forming a government. But at that time, after 1929, the next election, that's when everything went basically out the window. So there's Hitler coming out as the strongest guy, and we need a chancellor. And then in German system, you got the president, who really has very limited powers, other than he's naming the chancellor, when the chancellor is the one who's actually running the business, right? The president who'd lived through World War I and times before under the emperor, and I don't know, there's a lot of stuff going on back in the day, right? It was like, I cannot put this populist demagogue in office. I don't care if he got 33% of the vote, but he doesn't have the majority. He doesn't have over 50%, even though he got the most votes. I cannot. If nobody wants to form a government with him, I don't have a working government. I cannot put this guy in office. And it wasn't until he was convinced by one of the other party leaders to give it a try, because we can control him, that he actually did. And it's interesting because by the time, so there were actually new elections because there was no government for a while in 1932, and there were new elections, and actually Hitler's percentage point went down by 1 or 2. So in this period of half a year or a year, whatever it was between elections, his popularity actually went down. But still, at that point, it was like, we really have to have a working government, so here's what we're going to do, and we'll see what happens. There was, for example, active disruption in Congress. And we haven't seen it like that, but what Hitler and his party members basically did is they invited some of their troublemakers to come into session with Congress, and then start screaming and making noise, and so that nobody could make policy. Basically, turning around, that Hitler says, well, this government machine doesn't work. We need to do something to make it work. It doesn't matter that it's my own people that keep it from working, but it doesn't work. On the streets, the same hired guns would put fear into people and basically start fights. Hey, look, there's a communist over there. Let's beat him up. And there was chaos in the streets. Really turning into whatever happened on, I think it was about February 28th in 1933, when somebody, and nobody knows who, set fire to the Reichstag, the congressional building, the government building in Berlin, where Hitler said, "We gotta fight crime. You guys need to give me more executive powers." So after barely 6 weeks in office as the chancellor, he actually, as many people believe, a false flag operation that he used to basically abuse his power and get himself more powers. And I say that because we see some of these things happening, especially with the populism. I tell you what you want to hear. I tell you that I'm going to keep the immigrants out. I tell you that I bring the jobs. And we've heard that during the election time frame. And apparently that's what people were voting for. Or ignoring the warning signs that some people would tell them. It's like, okay, but does it stop there, or is it going to go further? And I might be going a little off topic now, but a lot of people say, but why did the people not see what Hitler was doing? Because, funny enough, he gave them jobs. One of the things that started with Hitler was, for example, the Volkswagen Beetle. We're building a car for every man and woman, and it's going to be a small car, it's going to be an affordable car, and everybody can get one.
And I believe they got great gas mileage back then.
Well, I have no idea about that.
I think they did.
We're going to build the Autobahn system, or as we would call it, the interstate system, so that people can drive their Volkswagens and go to places. Now, I think that was a half-truth. We're going to build some Autobahns so we can roll our tanks to foreign countries that we're trying to invade. But little do the people know, they had jobs. They were happy. Now, mind you, this all cost the government a lot of money. Because especially building the Autobahn system, there was no incentive or especially high tax payments or anything like that. So we have this gigantic debt. We're living in a different age where people don't think about, hey, my government is going in debt, and what does that mean? We don't even understand how that works, right? Because we were just all jobless, and now we have jobs again, and it's great. Actually, most of our salaries overall went down as compared to before we lost our jobs. We don't even complain about that, because we have jobs, we have to eat, and we have this outlook, and there's this guy who's going to do away with the reparation payments. So our future is golden, and nobody looks at what happens on the other side. And one of the things why people didn't even see what was going on is,
well, how aware were they even of things that were going on? Was it reported on? I see you might be answering that soon.
I'm glad you asked. This was exactly where I was just going. So one of the other things during the first months, literally, of Hitler's chancellorship is that he created a word which is called Lügenpresse, which means the lying press.
Yes.
He used that in his speeches over and over to tell the people, don't believe a word you see in the newspaper. After he had executive powers, after the false flag operation setting fire, he would start prohibiting newspapers. And he would only allow newspapers to be sold and to be working that wrote what he liked, basically, or what he wanted them to write. He would actually jail journalists so that they couldn't report anymore. And by that time, again, this is why I bring this up, there was no internet, there was no TV, there was no radio. You had to rely on word of mouth or a newspaper to learn anything that was going on or see it with your own eyes. And if you didn't, you now got everything spoon-fed by the governmental-controlled newspaper that basically learned what Hitler wanted you to see and hear and believe how things were. It's as fascinating.
Why in the United States, why are we not looking out for this? What causes? Why don't people want to look for these signs?
I have read many different theories about this because, I mean, let's face it, as horrifying as this might be to some, it's fascinating. Why do people vote for one person and not the other, and what's going on? And yes, there are anthropologists out there that say, well, if we look throughout history, not just Nazi Germany, we will find that we have about every 70 to 80 years, we have some type of catastrophe. Sometimes it's a natural catastrophe, it's a disease outbreak before we had modern medicine, and then we have the Third Reich and World War II, and we have these huge major events. I don't think it have to be that way. But they might have a point. They might be right, and I just haven't studied life and history enough. So those are people that say, well, history is bound to repeat itself. And it will. And there will be something tragic, and after that, we're basically rising like Phoenix out of the ashes again. Too bad, because there will be many casualties. And I do think it's also a very dark outlook. It's like there have to be casualties because it is going to be a catastrophe.
But this is almost like this is story just goes around and around. It happens here, it happens there, it happens there, and before people are able to extract the concept from it and say, look, this is what's happening.
That would be my personal hope. Is like, hey, can we? I find, well, besides finding history fascinating, I find history vitally important. If we don't learn from it, then we are bound to make mistakes again. And I always hope that hey, if we all look back, then we will actually learn from it and take something away from it, and avoid those mistakes. I'm more inclined to think in you might call this an arrogant opinion, but I think people want mainly two things, and it's funny by simplifying this explanation. I'm playing right into it. People want simple, and people want safe and secure. If I don't have to think about something and look at it from 3 different angles and read 15 books about it to understand something, my life is good because I can focus on turning on the TV and having a good time. I can go out and watch a sports event, go to a concert, do whatever, and I don't have to worry, I don't have to think, I don't have to figure anything out. If I live in a 1950s world, I can go to school, come out of school, maybe go to college, maybe not, start a job, and not change jobs until I retire. That is easy. I don't have to think about it. On the other hand, I don't want to suffer, so I want to be safe. I don't want crime to happen. I don't want anything to happen to my family. I want to live in my own little bubble where nothing can happen to me, because I just want to grow old and die. Basically, preferably the same job that I started 40 years ago. This is a very simple explanation of people want simple, but I see this a lot. And unfortunately, this was true for some in the 1950s. Definitely not all. I mean, especially in America with racial segregation, those kind of things, it definitely wasn't true for all. But it's not true in the 1980s, where we live in a different world with a lot of new technology compared between 50s and 80s, especially not in 2017. We're at a level of technology that is so much overkill that people don't even know what to do with it anymore. And this is where simple no longer works. I mean, even in the 80s, the times were gone where you would have your lifetime job. And so now what do you need to do to stay on the jobs market? You need to keep educating yourself. You need to keep learning so you still have a job tomorrow. And that's hard. Especially if you've already been in a job for 20, 30 years. And now all of a sudden it's like, the job market changed. You need to learn something else so you can still work another 10 years until retirement. That is hard. I don't want to do that. I want to listen to somebody who says, I'm going to fix that for you. I'm going to get you a job. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to learn anything new. Just go back to your old job because I'm going to make that happen. Would you vote for the guy? But many people do. For the viewers and listeners at home, Carl is shaking his head. But many people do. They say, well, it's great. I don't have to worry about it. I can do that. The other thing is safe and secure. Let's think about this. When did you have your first cell phone?
1999.
1999. All right. I thought I was late, and I had mine in 1998. And I didn't want one. I was only 27 years old. So I was fairly young. And I had a hard time adapting to this new thing, this new technology that would allow me to be connected to people at any time. I mean, I only for 27 years lived a life of, to get a hold of me, try and find me, or call me at home and get lucky that I'm there, or even have an answering machine, which not everybody did. Now imagine you were 50 or so in 1999. Wouldn't that stuff scare you? It's like, there are definitely some older people that go and embrace it and say, hey, look, this is so cool. I can now talk to my grandson while I'm taking a stroll in the park. Great. But I believe that the majority of people at that age would go like, oh my God, that's scary. What's that going to do to me? It's just a cell phone, but we don't know that. And now, fast forward another 18 years, with internet, everything, with refrigerators that can order your food from the store that gets delivered to your door. I mean, it's like, isn't that scary? Who's going to comprehend what all is going on here? Yes, we want simple. We want to say, basically, we probably want to talk to our refrigerator and tell them to, we're out of milk. And the next morning you open the door and there's your milk. That'd be fantastic. It would be simple. But at the same time, all this whole the way the world is going, it's scary. And it's not getting any easier, especially when we go back to the jobs market. Things are getting a lot more specialized, and jobs go away because they get taken over by automation and those kind of things. And there's other scary things happening in the world that you don't understand. There are terrorist attacks. And if you want to go back to Germany with me, I will take you to a time in the 1960s where we had our own domestic terror attacks. We had terrorist groups that did nothing but really acts of violence, blowing people up, shooting people, revolting against the order. We actually have a long history with that. We had during the Olympics in Munich in 1972, we had airplanes hijacked. Does that ring a bell? Airplanes hijacked? It happened 30 years before. The first American ever thought about, oh my God, they can hijack airplanes and fly them into buildings? To us, it was a lot more of a reality. It's like terrorist attacks can happen. Yes, we're trying to protect ourselves from them. They still happen. And if we don't fast forward to 2001, in America, it comes like falling out of the sky that, oh my God, these people are evil, and we need to go to war, and we need to kill them all, and we need to make sure that nobody ever gets in again, and I don't know what all to do. It's a scary world. Again, this is 15, 16 years ago, and people all of a sudden don't feel safe anymore. And now you have somebody come out and says, I'm going to send all of them home. I'm not going to let any one of them in. They can't blow up our buildings anymore. I don't know if that's going to work, but that's what people like to hear. He's going to fix it for me. Simple. I don't have to worry about it. And I'm safe. And again, like I said in the beginning, that might be a very simplistic way of explaining things, but there are a lot of people wired that way.
On a lighter note, Nils Rurack is working on a new record.
That is correct.
We'll try to wrap it up here because this seems like we can pull at least like 4 episodes out of you, I think, over the next several months.
If anybody...
Because we barely got into Germany here, and without the world ending, we can talk. Wrap up by talking about what's going on with you and your music. You are working on a new record, and you have a special guest performing on.
Yes.
A track or two. I think it may be just one track right now.
One track right now, yes. It all depends on cash flow, really. I created a fusion project in 2014. One of the things that where Carl and I don't agree much on music, but one of the things that we both...
I didn't know that.
I'm kidding. But one of the things that I think I actually even... named the title after talking to Carl, and the title of the project is Textures. And textures are very important. One thing we come across in music, especially in popular music, are very familiar sounds. Like you have a rock band that has 1 or 2 guitars and drums and bass and something like that. We have fusion. We have a keyboard player and a bass and drums and maybe a saxophone or a guitar or something. There are a couple of those combinations that I find fascinating. For example, if you have guitar and saxophone playing the same line together, there's some distorted guitar in a saxophone. There's some. To me, it's a fascinating sound. You get this air blowing on one and the screaming on the other, basically, and they complement each other in a very interesting way, especially if you put some octaves between the lines or something like that. One of the things that always fascinated me was the use of percussive instruments that play melodies, like vibraphone and xylophone and marimba, that Frank Zappa basically used a lot in his music. And so I was trying to do that. This project, I'm basically, I call it Textures because I have guitars in there, I have saxophone in there, and I tried to find somebody who can play percussives. And
who played saxophone?
Friend of mine in Florida, Paul Messina, I believe a retired firefighter, and he's been big in music for a while, doing his own thing, and he is the one that I did the whole Anti-Sprout album with, which you can actually find on my Bandcamp page. I do believe you can find that on CD Baby as well, which was like the first part of this project we're working on right now. It was just a guitar and saxophone. So I'm now trying to expand this and throw this percussive instrument in there as well. So they all can trade off each other in terms of melodies and accompaniment. The difficulty is I don't know anybody who plays all these percussive instruments and does home recording and all that kind of stuff. In order to find somebody, I decided, hey, I'm going to contact someone who does that and ask them if they know anybody younger who's trying to just go out there and experiment and play more and do some recording and stuff. And this is why I thought, well, who do I know? And I only know one. And then there's Ed Mann, who played with Frank Zappa. And I just asked him, I said, do you know anybody who does this stuff? Do you have any students or anybody who would be interested to lend their skills for recording? He's like, well, I do that. Yeah, this is where we are. So at this point, he's on one song because we came to an agreement, and it's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
And people will be able to hear that on your Bandcamp. What's that URL? Bandcamp.bandcamp.com /
No, it's just nilsrurack.bandcamp.com.
Nils Rurack, or just one rur?
Just one rur.
Rurack.bandcamp.com.
That's correct.
All right, bye.